Hi everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Rachel. I'm Ruth, and as Rachel said, I'm the Innovation and Evaluation Lead at Fulfilling Lives, LSL. First of all, just to say what an incredible keynote from Sam, and yeah, just a really important message to do things differently. And this morning, the rest of this morning's session and the rest of the day, we're going to be really thinking about the tools and approaches that can help us to do things differently and to really make change happen. So hopefully, we can keep the spirit of Sam's keynote with us throughout the rest of the day. So, it's my pleasure to begin this morning's session on systems thinking. What do we mean by it? How can we go about embedding the approach? And also, what has that looked like for us at Fulfilling Lives LSL? And again, through the morning, we'll be thinking about really practical tools and approaches that will help us to embed systems thinking as an approach. As Diane has already mentioned in the introduction, Fulfilling Lives LSL has been commissioned to create lasting change for people experiencing multiple disadvantage, and we're one of multiple programs across England that have been commissioned to do that. Our work is based on an understanding that the system does not currently work for this group of people. For people experiencing multiple disadvantage, you have a real complexity of interacting needs. And again, building on what Diane was saying, we know that people get passed around the system again and again. They face multiple barriers to accessing the support that they really need, and they often slip through the gaps. And our research and evidence has really demonstrated that multiple times, as has the evidence across other programs, Fulfilling Lives programs, and wider national research too. We believe that it's not individuals and people who are hard to reach or the problem, it's the system that's the problem. And the system doesn't currently work for many people experiencing multiple disadvantage. In order to better meet the needs of people experiencing multiple disadvantage, there's a real need for change, and that requires a shift in thinking. And systems thinking provides a framework for this. It's an approach that really flips the narrative and supports long-lasting change. And indeed, systems thinking underpins everything that we do at Fulfilling Lives LSL, and you'll hear more about that shortly and the different activities we've been doing. So, why systems thinking, and what can it offer us? Systems thinking is a tool for change and a way to organise our thinking. System thinking invites us to recognise and work with the complexity of systems and to really sit with that complexity. It invites us to understand how the system operates and behaves. It invites us to think about the system as a series of interconnected parts that constantly interact with each other, and to the extent that if you change one part of the system, there'll be an impact on other parts of the system because they're all ultimately interconnected in one way or another. Underpinning systems thinking is the belief and the understanding that the actual structure of a system determines how it behaves and how it operates, and therefore directly impacts people's experiences of the system. Systems thinking also invites us to identify the patterns at play within a system. So again, that shift away and move away from looking at individual events or individual interventions towards understanding how systemic structures create these one-off events. So really thinking about what patterns are at play. And that helps us to identify and explore underlying root causes to many different issues, and also to enable the longer term and sustained change. So an example of how that shift, what that shift might look like, or the difference and impact that might make. If you were interested in homelessness, or preventing homelessness, for example, you might well increase the supply of housing, but if you don't address the factors causing poverty, then people still may not be able to afford a home to live in. And therefore, the structure that prevails there enables homelessness to prevail too. System thinking also provides a framework to determine the places in the system where changes can have a big impact. So through exploring system behaviour, you might be able to identify a small part, or a relatively small part of the system, where you can make a potentially easily achievable change, and that would then have a ripple effect, and potentially an enormous ripple effect across many different elements of the system, again because they are interconnected. So ultimately, systems thinking is a tool that enables long-lasting change, and there are various different approaches and processes that you can apply to help explore this and embed this as an approach. And again, we'll be exploring that through the morning and exploring different examples of how we've done that at Fulfilling Lives too. So, how have we put systems thinking to work at Fulfilling Lives LSL? Systems thinking can sound and feel theoretical and abstract, but we're really looking at the system as a lived reality, and we invite you to do the same. The system at the heart of our thinking is fairly specific. We're interested in how the system is experienced by a really specific system user, and that's people who have experienced multiple disadvantage, some of the most marginalised people in society. The system at the heart of our thinking at Fulfilling Lives LSL is also located within a specific geographical location, so the South London boroughs of Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham, although we believe that the local learning and the localised systems thinking that we've been doing is relevant for other areas too. Through the delivery of the programme, we've been, and we continue to be, interested in the following overarching questions that have driven our systems thinking. Firstly, how does the system operate for people experiencing multiple disadvantage? And then what can we do better to better meet the needs of people experiencing multiple disadvantage? Thinking deeply about these questions has enabled us to build an evidence base about the system's challenges at play, and also it's enabled us to find different solutions in order to better meet the needs of this group of people. So in practical terms, we've applied systems thinking in a number of ways. Firstly, building an evidence base and providing greater insight into the way in which the system operates. So we've been, for example, developing various research, different learning reports, evidence reviews, etc., and you'll hear more about that shortly from our research and learning partners. We've also identified opportunities for systems change within the system, for example, through identifying systems change priorities and delivering projects to progress on these priority areas. We also support other organisations, services and parts of the system to apply systems thinking themselves. And we also take a systemic approach to the direct support that we provide. And again, we'll be exploring all of these different areas in more detail. And first of all, we'll think a bit more about those first two, so digging a bit deeper into actually what has it looked like to build that evidence base and what are some of the findings from that, and then what are some of the opportunities that we've been able to identify as well. So, one of the key things we've been doing is building up this evidence base to provide greater insights into how the system is working and how it behaves. We identified gaps and took steps to provide these greater insights and to really understand in more detail how the system currently operates. To support us in this building of an evidence base, we commissioned a research and learning partnership with a number of partners who are here today. So firstly, MPC, a think tank and consultancy organisation who bring specialism in many areas, but including systems approaches. Groundswell, a homelessness organisation who specialise in co-production and peer research. And CRASER, the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research, part of Sheffield Hallam University, who bring an academic lens and also subject matter expertise. So the partnership were brought together for a number of reasons and with a number of key aims in mind. Firstly, to better understand the system, and particularly we were interested in exploring how people were experiencing actually accessing the system and services, what barriers were they facing. And also particularly interested in points of transition through or around the system, and also just generally how the system behaves, how this is or isn't working, and why. The partnership have also been exploring how things could change and helping us to capture good practice and identify opportunities for change, and again, you'll hear more about this shortly. And they're also supporting us to embed change. So, for example, via a series of action learning events, which are going to be taking place next year. So do look out for those. With the partnership, we've published a number of outputs, reports, and various different outputs that provide these insights into how the local system's operating. So in the next section, you'll hear more about the tools which have helped us to capture how the system operates, as well as some headline findings from this work. So I'll now hand over to colleagues Margery Infield and Dr. Suzy Solley from MPC and Groundswell, respectively. Margery is a senior consultant at MPC who leads on the Fulfilling Lives LSL Research and Learning Partnership and has been very heavily involved in developing the systems map that you'll hear more about shortly. And she also provides advice on effective philanthropy to a range of clients and supports charities in redeveloping their strategies. And Dr. Suzy Solley is a research manager at Groundswell who manages a number of research and evaluation projects on homelessness and multiple disadvantage, and has been working as part of the Research and Learning Partnership for the last few years too. So I will hand over to you both.
Are you happy to do the slides, Suzy? Yes. Wonderful. Thank you, Ruth, so much for that introduction. We've got big shoes to fill now. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the past 2 years. Can't believe it's been nearly 2 years now. We've got a few months left of the partnership and still working away. So we'll be talking about some of the work that we have already done. First of all, I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the approaches that we have been using through the partnership. So this is just a summary of some of the most important work that we have been doing. So we've done a huge amount of desk-based research, supported by our colleague Steve from the Centre for Regional Economic and Social Research, who is also here today, so do say hello to him later. We've also done a huge number of interviews and focus groups with people who have both lived and learned experience of the system. And then the two approaches which Suzy and I are going to talk through in a bit more detail today are peer research and the systems mapping work that MPC has done a lot of. So I'll hand over to Suzy now to talk through the peer research, and then we'll come back to talk through some of the systems mapping in a minute.
Thanks, Margery, and thanks, Ruth, for that introduction. Apologies that there's not going to be any pirates in our presentation, but hopefully you'll still enjoy it. So Groundswell led on the peer research aspect, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. But there's also a couple of podcasts, and there's also a report that we'll point you in direction of as well to read. So we conducted 41 qualitative in-depth interviews with people who are living or being supported in Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham. And Groundswell staff members with lived experience of multiple disadvantage conducted those interviews. As you can see from the timeline, December to March 2021, what were we all doing? So unfortunately, we had to do a lot of those conversations on the phone. To take part, people had to meet 2 criteria. So either have experience of mental ill health, substance use, homelessness, or involvement with the criminal justice system. And it's important here that we say that that could be current or historic, because we know that people have ongoing challenges, and some people live, for example, with mental ill health throughout their life. So this research was really sort of brought to life by a group of volunteers who we describe as experts by experience. So we initially met weekly and then every 2 weeks from October to July 2021. And the volunteers were really influential in a number of ways. I'm just going to kind of go through those. The first one was they helped to develop the questions that we're asking people. So we call that the research tool, the research questions. They're involved in the systems map that Margery's going to talk about as well, and in case studies that you can see in the report. In the podcast, you'll be able to hear their voices in the podcast as well, and in poems and reflective writing in the research as well. And you can see a poem here on the bottom right-hand corner, written by one of our volunteers about her experience of being part of the group. And the volunteers were also really important in the analysis of the data and the themes and the headings in the report. And in the next slide, I think you'll see a lot of the phrases and terminology are kind of words and phrases that we talked about a lot. And the volunteers were also really important in contributing and presenting at the launch event in July. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a few sort of key findings, and I'm sure some of which will not be no surprise to you. But also, if you want to hear more, you can listen to 2 of our podcasts and also in the report. So the first one is ups and downs. You know, we find that journeys have bumps and setbacks on the way, but obviously sometimes the way that services are designed doesn't always reflect this. Pathways are often very linear, and people come to a service and they're expected to sort of pop out on the other side, everything is fine, and never have challenges again. But often when people need support, they often need to start the whole process again, and what they feel is going back to the beginning. And this relates to the idea that people need to hit what the volunteers described as rock bottom, need to reach a crisis point in order to get support. So for example, if somebody wanted a small amount of support to maintain their well-being or the recovery, that was often not possible and have to go back to the beginning again. The next one's about expectations. They're not always realistic or reflective of the experiences of multiple disadvantage. The determinants of success, of outcomes and goals are often decided by services and not people experiencing multiple disadvantage. For example, in terms of substance use, there's an expectation that people need to be abstinent. But for some people, their goal might be to increase their confidence or improve their relationships or just decrease the amount that they are using. The other thing is the interconnection of needs. Where people are seen as a whole person rather than a collection of needs, the support was often more appropriate. So, as we said before, support can be siloed and there can be a sort of vicious cycle where people are stuck, unable to move forward. For example, with substance use and mental health, you're told to get your substance use sorted first before you get your mental health sorted, and vice versa. And I think the quote on the bottom right really exemplifies this interconnection of needs, in this case of housing and substance use. As you can see, the quote reads, "The housing was more important to me than heroin, but heroin was more available than housing." Participants described having to jump through hoops, circles, and to tick boxes. Navigating the system is not easy, and the process of getting support made people want to give up. Being heard and in control. People need to be listened to and given choices, and this has a massive impact on outcomes. And obviously at times services have very limited choices that they can give people, but even when that was very limited and that decision making was given to that person, it was often very powerful for people's recovery. Relationships and community. People who want to move away from some of those challenges they're experiencing often have to make changes, huge sacrifices to relationships. For example, if somebody's wanting to come away from using substances, they have to change completely maybe their social circle, and that can leave people feeling very isolated. Hence why relationships with services can be so important, and also opportunities to broaden social networks and have hobbies and activities and things are so important. Been there and got the t-shirt. Shared experience is powerful and integral in recovery, whether that's peer support or peer practitioners. But it's also important that there are peer roles in all layers of an organisation, not just in the front line, but in comms and finance and all different departments. And lastly, informed approaches, that is gender, cultural, trauma. And culture, I'm going to nod to here, is one that often gets missed, but I think is vitally important in understanding a person's frame of reference and how they experience the world. So I'm just going to pass you back to Margery.
Lovely. Thank you, Suzy. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about the systems mapping that we have done. I appreciate that the term systems mapping might appear a bit esoteric to some of you. So I'm just going to start off by explaining a little bit about what we mean when we say systems mapping. So a systems map really is a tool, and it's a tool to help stakeholders better see and understand the system that people are experiencing. It involves describing and drawing what the system looks like. And the map that we have spent time developing, both with experts by experience and also people with learned experience of the system in Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham, focuses specifically on barriers that people experience on their recovery journey when they're trying to access support. So keep that in mind. It is really all about barriers that people face. So you can see up on the slide here the process that we went through for developing the systems map. So we started off by interviewing a huge number of people. Some of those were the interviews that Suzy has just talked about with experts by experience, but we also talked to other stakeholders in the system. In fact, I see some familiar faces in the audience here, so I think some of you may find the map looking a bit familiar to you. And we then went through a process of analysing everything that we'd found through the interviews and putting together a first draft of the map, which, I'll show you the finished version in a minute rather than the first draft. But we then iterated it. So we realised that one round of interviews was not really sufficient. So we took that map, we shared it with people. People challenged us quite rightly on a number of the things in the map, and we refined it. So we did that a couple of times, and we tested it in workshops as well. And there was also an identification of key issues. So what we really wanted to do with the map was use it to understand where there are areas in the system that could lead to significant change. So sometimes those of you that are familiar with systems thinking, you might have heard of these referred to as leverage points. We talk about them as key issues, but they're areas where small change can lead to big effects. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Suzy to play the video of the systems map on the website where you can find it. I'm just going to say before that it is quite a complicated map. There are an awful lot of parts to it, and what I'm going to show you now is just a taster. It really is a whistle-stop tour. I would really encourage you to go and find the map on the Fulfilling Lives website. It's under the resources section, and go and have a play around with it, because you'll see that what you can see on this little taster really is just a tiny part of the whole map. So, Suzy, if you're able to play the video, that would be great. So this is what the map looks like. Each of the coloured areas is a theme in the map, so we've grouped the barriers into themes. And each of the bubbles is a different barrier that you might find in the system. Now you can zoom in on just one theme. This is the theme of accessing support. And you can see here the arrows between the barriers. So where there are interconnections between things, you can see those highlighted. That bubble there is people end up in services that do not meet their needs. The map also allows you to see the evidence that we've collected behind each barrier. So if you select an individual bubble, you can then see the evidence that we've collected from people across the system about why it's an issue. And on this one, you can see that there are some quotes from people with lived experience of the system. So I think it's really quite a valuable resource to see the reflections of people across the system, both with professional experience and their own lived experience, as to why that barrier was an issue for them. And here we are just zooming back out so that you can see the connection between that individual bubble we were just looking at and the whole map. So each of those arrows is an interconnection between different themes as well, so not just within one area. So you can really see how issues around accessing support may have consequences in a completely different area of the system as well. On the next page, I'll just quickly run through what those 9 themes are across the different colours. So I won't dwell on these too long because there's an awful lot to say on each one, and our time is limited here. But I will just say that we're not saying that there are issues across all of these of the same magnitude. And what we've done here is just categorise each of the barriers into different themes. So we have barriers around accessing support, engaging with support, transitioning between and from services, barriers created by government and policy priorities, also commissioning priorities, the way services are set up, information sharing and collaboration, shaping and designing support, and knowledge, attitudes and emotions. So you can see that we really have tried to capture a huge number of different things in this map. So as I say, that's a whistle-stop tour. I'm sorry we didn't have longer to dive into it, but please do go and have a look on the Fulfilling Lives website and see what you make of it. Okay, so why was this map important? You can say it looks lovely, it looks cool and funky, but what does it mean? What does it tell us? Well, there are a huge number of things that we learned through the process of systems mapping. Here are the 4 things that we think are most important that come out of it as opportunities for change. And it's actually quite gratifying listening to Di's keynote speech earlier and to Ruth and Suzy. I think a lot of the themes are reflected in what's already been said. So the first opportunity for change is that people experiencing multiple disadvantage should be involved in commissioning services and designing service delivery. So we're talking here about true co-production, and it's fantastic that that's the theme of the conference this afternoon. So I won't dwell on it too long because there are many more people more expert than me to talk about that later. The second opportunity for change is for effective services for people experiencing multiple disadvantage to be supported by public policy priorities and funding that support the whole person, not specific issues. So I'm sure this is a theme that you've heard before, but it really came out strongly from talking to people, both service providers and people with their own experience, about how important it is to have consistency across someone's support and to make sure that people are seeing the whole person rather than seeing specific issues. The third area for change is around putting soft outcomes first and not focusing purely on hard outcomes. I'm really pleased to say that we have 2 publications that are being launched today to coincide with the conference about the importance of soft outcomes and person-led approaches. There's one that is specifically aimed at commissioners and also one to support service providers to embed that thinking in their own work. So we're talking really here about recognising the importance of relationships, as Diane said earlier, and not focusing on measuring measurable things or things that are easily measurable to the detriment of things that can make a really big, important difference in people's lives. And then the last opportunity for change is about better supporting service providers and practitioners. So we know that service providers and practitioners are doing a fantastic job with limited resources. And often we've heard from practitioners that they would really value more headspace, lighter workload, but also specifically support around becoming more trauma-informed, gender-informed, culture-informed. So there's a real opportunity to better support practitioners who are doing the best that they can already to do an even better job. So those are the 4 things that we thought were the really key messages coming out of the systems map. There are also a whole raft of other learnings as well, which we're taking forward in the research, but those are the most important ones. And I'll pass back to Suzy now, just to talk through some of our other research findings and how the partnership is progressing.
Thanks, Margery. So as you can see, there's some images of some of the reports and resources that we have, which are all available on the Fulfilling Lives website. There's a fantastic literature review written by Krezer. We've got the peer research report. That lovely image in the middle is an illustration from an event we had in July. And we've got a couple of resources written by MPC and one by Groundswell about trauma as well. So I'm just going to play you, hopefully, a bit of a podcast. So we've got 2 podcasts. One is called Listen to Me and the other is called The Missing Piece. And the names came from the volunteers, the experts by experience, whose voices you can hear in the podcast. And also members of Groundswell team as well are in the podcast too. I should thank Sarah, who's a member of our team who did a lot of the music for the podcast as well. And what we decided to do is we asked the public to send in some questions for our experts by experience, and we used the form of the podcast to answer some of those questions. So when you hear a question in the podcast, that's a question that's come from the public. So they're both about 10, 12 minutes long. I'm not going to play them both today, but I'm just going to give you a little snippet just to whet your appetite and go and listen to the whole thing. So if the technology prevails, I should just click this and it should just start.
This question comes from a member of the public who asked, what's the most helpful thing that someone has done to support you in your recovery? What does good support really look like?
Listen to me. Support is allowing that person to figure things out themselves. Stop pushing them or forcing them or telling them your way of doing stuff. Trying to understand where they're coming from and let them figure it out themselves in their own way.
What good support looks like. I think there's something about transparency and honesty about what you can and can't do. Yeah, what someone can and can't do for you, I think is really important.
This quote comes from a participant who took part in the research. I've only ever told him, my GP, once that I was using. And when I told him that, I found out later that it actually worked against me in getting some funding for some services because they won't treat you if you're using, and I was using, so I couldn't get any help. So, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
tiny snippet there. But we really encourage you to, use them when you're speaking at places and to take snippets from them. And yeah, brilliant. I think I'm going to pass you back to Ruth now. Cool.
Thank you so much, Margery and Suzy, and also for all others involved in the partnership, but also those that have fed into the various activities that have been going on as part of the partnership. And yeah, as Suzy said, do check out the outputs on our website, and yeah, dig into kind of what we've been learning and into the evidence base. So yeah, how else have we embedded systems thinking at Fulfilling Lives? We've heard about the building of an evidence base and also explored some of the opportunities for change that have been identified. There are also other ways in which we've been able to apply systems thinking, and this includes directly conducting 6 systems change projects that seek to progress the opportunities identified. So, for example, we've been supporting organisations to embed trauma, gender and culturally informed responses. We've been supporting organisations to embed co-production, as well as doing that ourselves. And we're also exploring various other areas, such as improving access to substance use services. So I haven't got time to go into detail on these projects, but do get in touch to find out more, and all the team will be around too. We're also supporting others in their journeys for embedding systems thinking and the learning identified through the programme. So, for example, we're working with MPC to deliver a series of systems thinking workshops and reflective spaces, specifically in Southwark with the community safety team there. And we're supporting them to apply systems thinking as a lens to reduce exploitation and harm in the community, and particularly thinking about the system user group of young women who've experienced exploitation. Part of what we do at Fulfilling Lives as well is provide direct support to people experiencing multiple disadvantage, and that's done by our brilliant practitioner team who are here today as well. And as part of the approach that we take to service delivery, we really embed a systemic approach too. So we see the system as the issue rather than the individual. We understand how trauma and life experiences and identity really impact people's experiences of the system and how they interact with the system. And we seek to take an approach that is trauma, gender, and culturally informed. We also advocate for the people we support, helping them to navigate the system and challenge parts of the system that aren't currently working for them. We work closely with other practitioners to support wider shifts in thinking, as well as strengths-based approaches. And we see significant impact from taking this approach. So, for example, people accessing services for the first time, connecting and reconnecting with children and family members, rebuilding trust and building relationships. And our annual report that's been shared shares some further kind of headline insights from that too. So, a summary. Systems thinking helps us understand the complex system we are working in so that we can identify opportunities for long-term and positive change. Working with the research and learning partners has enabled us to build a strong evidence base to really understand the system in more detail and identify priority areas for change. Opportunities for systems change for people experiencing multiple disadvantage that have been identified through our work, and we've shared some insights into that, and look forward to working with you more on these. And we're also delivering systems change projects that really respond to the opportunities identified through the work that we've shared. So yeah, we've explored various tools so far, for example, systems mapping and peer research, and through the rest of the morning we'll be exploring further tools such as systems leadership, through the rest of the morning. So we look forward to exploring those more with you after the break. Thank you.